Hey guys, I hope you're in class. You should be there. I'm getting ready to go over the rest of chapter 10. So let me know if you have any questions afterwards, like shoot me an email or something. Whatever. And if you hear random meowing throughout this thing as while I'm trying to record the sound, I have this one sitting on my lap because she doesn't want to leave me alone. So if you hear a random meow, it's just Maggie. It's nothing to worry about. So we're going to go to chapter 10. See you guys on Wednesday. Alright, so we're going to go over the kind of part 2 of chapter 10. And we're going to talk about communicating in families as well as communication issues that occur in families. So first, under communicating in families, we're going to talk about what makes a family. There are different types of families, and then we're going to go over the communication issues in families. That's just an overview, so I've got a slide for each of them, so if you didn't get that written down, don't worry about it. Okay, so what makes a family? According to your textbook, there are 3 different things. We've got genetic ties, legal obligations, and there are also role behaviors. So genetic ties are anything, like if you're related by blood. So if you are biologically related to your mom, your dad, your brothers, your sisters, those are your genetic ties. In terms of legal obligations, they do make families because a parent has a legal obligation to, his or her child or children. For instance, they're legally obligated to provide them with, food, housing, education, clothing, all that type of stuff. And another example is marriage. So whoever you marry, that's a legal obligation. And then another one is adoption. So whoever someone chooses to adopt, they're legally obligated to do all of the things that they would do for a biological child. And the important thing to kind of remember about the legal obligation portion of what makes a family is these are things that, even though it is a legal obligation, most of the time people just feel like they need to do it anyways. It's kind of just, you become a parent and you don't feel like, you're doing what you're doing because of the law. You're doing it because you care about them. And the same thing goes with marriage and, adopting a child. And then the third one are these role behaviors. And role behaviors are just certain types of behaviors or maybe a role that you're expected to kind of play or engage in simply because you're a part of the family. So in my family, I am the little sister, so I am forever going to be the little sister. I could be 50 years old and my brother is still going to treat me like I am the little sister. And he's always going to be my big brother, no matter what. But I will always kind of play that sort of role in the family. Okay, so moving on to the actual types of families. There's a few different types. The first one is family of origin. And your family of origin is simply just the family you grew up with. This is usually it usually consists of your parents and your siblings, and that's essentially it. And this doesn't have to be biological. You could be adopted, and that's still your family of origin because it's where you grew up. Then the next type of family is a family of procreation. And this is the family that you start as an adult. It's considered to consist of you, your spouse, and then any potential children that you have. Now, in terms of your family of origin and then also, even your family of procreation, there are a couple different types of families that you can grow up in or end up creating. And so the first one is the nuclear family. It's the one that we all think of. It's traditional. You have your mom and your dad and your children. nobody's divorced, there are no stepchildren. That's it. Then the next type is the blended family. So there are two adults, and they have children that they're raising together, but they're not necessarily related. So, for example, my mom and dad got divorced when I was little, and my mom remarried, and I have two step siblings along with my brother, so we're kind of like a blended family. And then another type is actually just a single parent family, and this is just when you have one parent, one adult, and raising the children, and that's it. And then the other one your book talks about is the extended family, and this is just your family in terms of, your grandparents, your cousins, your aunts, your uncles, all of those people, and, they may be a very important part of your family, and they may not be. So those are the different types of families that you should keep in mind. Okay, so communication issues in families. This is where stuff gets really interesting, at least in my opinion. So the first thing they talk about are these family roles, which are, different than the role behaviors we talked about before. So make sure you understand the difference between those. Family roles are kind of, each individual kind of has a function or purpose that they serve in the familial system. And the book highlights 4 different ones because they are the ones that come up when conflict occurs. So the first one they discuss is the blamer. And the blamer is pretty much what it sounds like. It is the person or this role where this person in the family holds other people responsible for whatever's going wrong, doesn't matter what it is, but they don't accept any personal responsibility, even if they are the one who is at fault. So I would not say that, I'm a blamer or that my brother's a blamer, but an example of how this could occur is actually when I was a little girl, I was in the kitchen with my brother, and my brother and I were playing catch, and he threw the ball at me, and I did not catch it. Keep in mind, my brother is 11 years older than me, okay? So I didn't catch the ball. My mom had just made a pie, so you can guess where the ball landed. Landed in the pie. Well, I don't really remember how I reacted because I was so young, but if you hear the story from my mom or my brother, they both say they blamed me. My mom said my brother blamed me, and I think my brother admits now to blaming me because he says I was young and I didn't catch the ball, so it was my fault that the pie was ruined. So that's an example of how you could be a blamer. And then we also have a placater. This is the peacemaker. This is the person who will go to any length to just reduce the conflict. They don't like conflict. They're going to try to get it to go away. I don't really know anyone like that, so maybe you guys have somebody who you could define as a placater in your family. The next one is the computer, and this is the person who, when conflict arises, is going to try to use logic and reasoning rather than any sort of emotions or feelings when you're trying to kind of diffuse a situation or just resolve it or prevent it from escalating. And I would say that this is definitely not me. I would say that this is usually somebody else in my family because I like to think with my emotions sometimes. But if you guys have any examples of a computer in your family roles, that would be great to hear from you guys. Sorry, it's getting a little awkward because you guys aren't here, and there's nobody to respond to me right now. Anyways, I hope you guys are laughing at that right now. If you're not, that's okay. I'll forgive you. So then we have the fourth one, which is the distractor. And this is the person who, when you're in the middle of conflict, they make the most random and irrelevant statements ever, hoping that the family will just sort of like forget that the conflict ever happened. Now, if you have somebody in your family that does this, you probably know it doesn't work. So, when it comes to these 4 types of family roles that come up in conflict, the blamer and the distractor are the ones that usually don't help. So if you know a blamer or a distractor, maybe, I don't know, you can work with them and tell them that they're not helping. Probably not, they'll keep doing it. But if you know the placater and the computer, those are actually very helpful. They are the best at sort of either resolving the issue or helping it from, or preventing it from escalating any. Okay, so next, there are family rituals, and these can kind of create some issues in terms of communication as well. But first, let's define what a ritual would be. A ritual is just, repetitive behavior, and, a family ritual is going to have some sort of special meaning for, you and your family. And these rituals can be really, really important, especially in blended families. Sometimes, what happens is when you create a blended family, it can cause kind of tension because, each family already had their family rituals, and then you come together to try to blend, and you don't want to take part in each other's rituals. But eventually what usually happens is you kind of create your own, like a new ritual. So in my family, an example would be they decided that on Christmas Eve, this new ritual was that we all get together on Christmas Eve, and that's when we kind of have like the blended family of sorts kind of Christmas. But since, my mom remarried when everybody else was really older than I was, we don't have many other rituals. And once again, you guys aren't here, so I can't go from any of your examples. Feel free to share them with me on Wednesday. Alright, moving on, we've got family stories. Family stories are actually really important in my family. Well, I'm going to tell you all about my family today, because that's what this is all about, and that's all I got to go off of. But, family stories. Sorry I keep digressing. Family stories. These are the stories that you kind of share, and a lot of times they are told over and over and over again. Most of the time they are. And they usually kind of have some sort of like underlying message to send about your family. So, an example the book uses is kind of like overcoming adversity. So maybe the story that gets told over and over again is about overcoming that adversity. So one thing that my family always likes to talk about is my grandma. She made really, really delicious angel food cake. Like, seriously, it's the best in the world. Not to brag or anything. But she was such a perfectionist about it that literally, like, I don't know if you guys have ever seen an angel food cake pan, but angel food cakes are supposed to be really tall, and if that cake did not rise above the pan, she would throw it away. It would still taste good, but she would throw that thing away. And eventually, once we figured this out, the family started requesting the throwaways. And she didn't throw them away if, like, it was for the family, but if it was for, like, a church function or something, she liked it to be perfect. But that story gets told over and over, and that's kind of, you know, one quality about it is told over and over. And then the second quality is the underlying theme. It's not really about the angel food cake. It's about how, we work hard, my family is a big believer in hard work, and I know it's just a cake, but it's kind of like a silly way of conveying that, we like to do things right, and we keep working on them until we get them right. So, and then after that, we got family secrets. Family secrets, there's two different types, okay? You've got family secrets that are kind of kept within the family. Everybody knows about it in the family, but we don't tell anybody. It's kind of just, we don't talk about that. And then the more interesting one, at least in my opinion, are the secrets that kind of are outside the family. Okay, and then we also have family secrets that are kind of within the family. These are the juicier ones because not everybody knows about them. So an example would be when my brother he wasn't engaged yet, or maybe he was engaged, I don't know, regardless. His now wife moved in with him, but they weren't married yet. And her family was really, really against this. So my mom knew about it, I knew about it, like most people knew about it, but we kept it away from her parents, even though they were both in their 30s. So that's an example of kind of family secrets that are within the family, but not everybody in the family knows. So, okay. So the next part of this chapter is all about creating a positive communication climate, and it, again, refers strictly to the family. So first, before we get into the rest of it, communication climate is just sort of the emotional tone of a relationship. So that's what we're going to be addressing. In the one section, we're going to go over using confirming messages and minimizing disconfirming messages. We're also going to talk about avoiding making others defensive, and we'll also discuss providing effective feedback. Alright, so first we're going to talk about using confirming messages and minimizing the disconfirming messages. So first, a confirming message is just any sort of behavior that indicates how much we value another person. And the book specifically talks about 3 different types. There's recognition, there's acknowledgement, and there's endorsement. Recognition is pretty much the most basic one, and you just sort of recognize that another person exists and that they're worthy of your attention. That's all that is. Examples of that would be like replying to a text message. So if your sister or your spouse or your brother or your mom sends you a text message and you reply to it, you are recognizing them, and that is a confirming behavior. There's also acknowledgement, and acknowledgement is sort of taking recognition a step further, and you're actually going to acknowledge their thoughts and feelings. So it's a little bit more positive in a way. You're kind of using your active listening behaviors. Maybe you kind of paraphrase what they say to show that you are indeed listening to them. And it really gives them a greater confirmation that you really do care about them. And then the final one is endorsement, and this is signaling that you actually agree with what they're saying. So one thing to kind of note about endorsement is you can fully endorse someone, or you can kind of partially endorse them. And, endorsing them is just, it's important because if you tell your friend something and you aren't sure about what you did or what you said, maybe you're looking for some sort of approval. It feels really good when that friend tells you, like, yeah, that was a good idea. or, maybe, I don't know, you did something silly and then they make you feel better about it, and then it's not as bad as you think it is. Um, they can partially endorse you, which is helpful, but so maybe, okay, here's an example. I got a tattoo the other day, probably like a week ago. Before I went to get it, I had partial endorsement from my mom, and like my mom means a lot to me. So getting partial endorsement from her was kind of a big deal because I didn't want to do anything that she didn't like or that was going to be disrespectful. And, I wanted just a full on endorsement, but I really wasn't expecting it because my mom's kind of old school like that. So once I actually got the tattoo, which is, I don't know if you guys remember because a couple of us talked about it. It's my grandma's signature that I got from a birthday card. And it's in a place that's hidden, nobody can see it. And so once I got it, I still had that partial endorsement from my mom, but then probably like, I don't know, maybe like a week into this, something like that, all of a sudden my mom surprises me and like I'm getting a full-blown endorsement for this tattoo. She's like, "Oh, it's actually a really good idea." Like my entire family is completely supportive of this tattoo. So it feels really good to have my family kind of respect that I did it and understand why I did it. And that is why we should, use these confirming messages, because even though, regardless of whether it's simple recognition, acknowledgement, or endorsement, they're all really important, but especially endorsement. So what we want to avoid are the disconfirming behaviors. And these are just behaviors that sort of imply a lack of regard for another person. And so even if you don't, it kind of goes back to the endorsement thing, even if you don't necessarily agree with something, you can still use confirming behaviors rather than these disconfirming behaviors that we're going to talk about. So one of the first disconfirming behaviors is an impervious response. And this is the simplest one, and this is just kind of when you ignore them. So your mom sends you a text message and you don't even reply. This would just kind of say like, I don't really care. Like I'm just not even gonna reply to you. And that makes people feel maybe neglected, unimportant. So just keep that in mind. And then the next one, and as we go on, again, just like with the confirming ones, these kind of each go up a notch. So after the impervious response, there's the verbal abuse. And this is sort of an overt form of disconfirming messages. You use words to hurt people emotionally and maybe even psychologically. So any sort of derogatory name calling, insults, put downs, sarcastic remarks, those are all sort of forms of verbal abuse. And the thing to remember about verbal abuse is, especially in close relationships, it can cause a lot of damage. So that's something you really do want to avoid. And then another type of disconfirming message is sort of just generalized complaining. And so if you're in like a conflict situation, specific complaints are really helpful. Not that anybody wants to hear complaining, but if you put something out there that is very specific, it can kind of lead to a more effective communication path of sorts. Whereas if you just kind of offer this generalized statement, you're just whining and moaning, it's really not going to do anything for the situation, and the person who is receiving this generalized complaint is just not really going to feel all that great. They're probably going to feel undervalued. And then The next one is an irrelevant response. And this is when you reply to somebody's message with something totally irrelevant. Like, I don't know, it would be like, and he's not a bad guy. He's actually helping me put this video together for you guys. But this is sort of a mild example. Would be when I'm trying to tell my husband something important and he responds to me with something totally irrelevant, probably because he didn't hear me say the other thing, but that's an example. And what the message it conveys is that, like, he doesn't really care about what I have to say, or like to pay attention to my words, but thankfully I know that's not true. He's just watching football. And then the last one is an impersonal response. This is when you reply to somebody and you kind of maybe use a cliche, don't show any real empathy. I feel like sometimes, and again, she doesn't mean to do this, sometimes like I'll tell my mom about something and she just responds with like, life is tough, you'll get by. It's really not what I'm looking to hear in that moment. I'm usually wanting something more specific, or something like, yeah, that really is awful. That does suck. So maybe I really want her to endorse the feelings of the crappiness of that situation, rather than just telling me that, life sucks sometimes. So just know you want to increase the use of your confirming messages. Even if conflict is about confirming messages, they're very important. And we want to avoid any sort of disconfirming messages, as they make the people receiving them feel not valued as much as they really are. Okay, so another thing that you want to consider in terms of family conflict, and really any sort of conflict, is you want to avoid making other people defensive. So defensiveness is just excess concern with guarding oneself against the threat of criticism. And what we really want to do is we want to be supportive. So we want to make people feel assured that that we care about them, and that we're going to protect them. And so there are actually 6 types of messages that actually promote defensiveness. And what your book does, it's really nice. It starts on page 341 if you guys want to look at it. It provides you with the defensive message and then offers sort of what you should do. So up here on the slideshow, the first one says evaluation versus description. The one you want to avoid is the evaluation, because the evaluative message actually kind of expresses this opinion and gives a value or worth to another person's behavior. And so the example they give is, this is the worst article you've ever written. Now you hear that and you're not going to feel so good. Whereas the description, or the descriptive message, would be, there are some opportunities for improvement in this article. Now, that still may be hard to hear, but it is a lot better than, this is the worst article you've ever written. So that is one type of message that can promote defensiveness. That is the evaluation. So description would be the route to go. And then moving on to the next page, you have control versus problem orientation. So control-oriented messages are somewhat manipulative. So the example in the book says, you can't watch TV right now, my show is on. Whereas the problem-oriented message says, let's figure out a way we can both watch what we want. So, the control-oriented method kind of can create this sort of defensive, like, why is my show less important than your show, And the problem-oriented one, well, you're going to figure out what the problem is. Maybe you have a DVR. Maybe you have a VCR. I don't know if you guys ever recorded your shows or not. I did back in the day. But the problem-oriented one is much more effective. It's going to lead to more effective communicative behaviors. And you will solve your problem more quickly. Then the other one is strategy versus spontaneity. So strategic messages generally withhold information, and this is kind of so you can control the listener. Whereas spontaneous messages express things very openly and honestly. There's no hidden agenda. So the example the book gives is, are you busy next weekend? That's the strategic message. Now the spontaneous message is, I'm planning a hike for next Saturday. Want to come? So the strategic, I think this is a rather poor example, but it's besides the point. The strategic message doesn't really tell the person, I really want you to go on this hike. Actually, this is probably a really bad example. In fact, if I wanted to get my husband to go on a hike, I would probably start with, are you busy next weekend? Because he is not a fan of hiking. So even though saying, I'm planning on going for a hike next Saturday, do you want to come with me? Even though that's really more effective, for some reason it feels like it's not. And then I just ask him if he's busy, and then he wants to know why, and he gets all defensive. So I really should just be open with him, but it's so hard to do. So we should just be more spontaneous with our messages. And then another one is neutrality versus empathy. And neutral statements just kind of imply a lack of concern for the well-being of others. Whereas your empathetic statements convey that concern. You do care about that person and how they're feeling. So, that kind of goes back to when I'm having a bad day and I talk to my mom and she's just like, well, not everything goes the way you want it to go. She's trying to help me, but what she doesn't realize is I'm going to end up getting defensive because I already know that everything doesn't go my way. So it's not really going to help me. Whereas her empathetic message might be something along the lines of, I'm sorry that happened. I know that can be really disappointing, etc., etc. Next, there is superiority versus equality. So messages of superiority, they encourage this division. So it's kind of like the us versus them. And that would be something like, you don't know what you're doing. Whereas a message of equality is going to emphasize inclusiveness. And so that might be something like, oh, that's really interesting. I've never thought about a situation that way before. And then finally, we've got certainty versus provisionalism. And messages of certainty tend to offer really inflexible conclusions. There's no room for debate. In provisional messages, the flexibility actually exists, and you want to kind of create a dialogue. So a message of certainty would just be like, you're wrong. Just like the book says, that's their example, you're wrong. And the provisional message that they give is, what leads you to believe that? Is it possible that the source of your information is mistaken? So, I think the politicians could take a lesson from this, probably. But they're not going to, because it's politics. So, this sort of model that is discussed in the book really suggests that you use the supportive version of these types of messages, because the supportive message is going to prevent the defensiveness. And when you kind of decrease the level of defensiveness in the other person, you're going to get further in whatever you're discussing, particularly if it is conflict. Defensiveness and conflict don't really go well together unless you're planning on going nowhere. So remember, supportive messages. Okay, we are on to our last slide. I bet you guys are excited. So we're going to talk about providing effective feedback. And so this is another way to kind of create a more positive communication climate in your family and possibly in other relationships. So the first thing you want to consider is what is called non-evaluative feedback. So non-evaluative feedback is any sort of reply that withholds the assessment of what the speaker has either said or done. And if you use this type of feedback, you're going to gain information about a situation and you can help others work through their feelings. And there are a few different ways to go about doing this. You can use a probe, you can paraphrase, or you can offer support. So what a probe is what you're essentially doing is asking questions. So if you ask these questions, you're going to gather more information, and then you can sort of help your family member or whoever it is you're talking to kind of work through that situation a little bit better. And then the next one is a paraphrase, and this is just repeating what someone else has said, but you put it in your own words. And this is very effective for two reasons. It assures a person that you're actually listening, and that you're trying to follow along with the conversation. And then secondly, it kind of gives the person an opportunity to correct any sort of misunderstandings, like maybe you just don't quite understand what they're trying to tell you, and so through paraphrasing, they can figure that out a little bit more easily. And so that's kind of helpful in those conflicts where if you have one of those arguments where you realize you're arguing about like two different things, paraphrasing probably would have helped you. But hindsight is 20/20. Then the last one is you can offer support, and this is just where you can maybe share your perceptions of the situation, and even like confirm the validity of the problem. And sometimes, even if you disagree with them, that doesn't mean that their problem is invalid, and so you can still offer that support. It's kind of a way to provide that validation without making them feel bad for it. So let me give you the example the book gives, because I think it's a good example. I can certainly understand how hard this must be for you and Chris. I'm not sure what I would do in your situation, but you have my support whatever you decide to do. So it's kind of like, you might feel like she should do this one thing, but she's your friend or your sister, so you're going to support her no matter what. And that makes her feel better. And so these three ways of offering support, they convey interest, and it's a way for you to kind of express the way you feel without any judgment. So that is one way you can provide effective feedback. Now, there's another kind which is actually evaluative feedback, and this is where you actually offer an assessment. You assess whatever they've done, what they've said, and there are two different ways. You can actually provide praise. Everybody likes praise. And so just because you're evaluating something doesn't mean that you have to identify its shortcomings. So the important thing is to remember that even if there is a flaw, you can still note certain strengths. So maybe you are looking over your, I don't know, your son's like paper or something that he has to turn in the next day, and it is filled with grammatical errors. Rather than pointing out all of those grammatical errors first, you would want to praise him or her, or I think I said son, so you'd want to praise him for maybe he has really good ideas. And maybe they're really well organized. He just really needs to work on proofreading. So you want to point out what he's done well first. So, son, you have really good ideas here. I think they're organized really well. We just need to work on proofreading this, and then it'll be really good. And then the other one is you can actually, we've all heard this, criticize constructively. So sometimes we really need to get those negative assessments in because they're important, but you don't want to just like point out what's wrong. You want to say what can be made better. It's not going to be helpful if you don't offer any help. Like, it's just, if you don't offer like any suggestions, if you don't offer any ways that someone could improve on what you are assessing. So the example the book gives is similar to what I just talked about. And it says, let's make the body of your paper as good as your introduction is. If you discuss your third main point first, I think that will help your points flow more smoothly. So it's very similar to what I just told you about, because they are pointing out some good things. The differences with praise, there may just be praise and that's it, but there are also some things that might need to be worked on. But with constructive criticism, there's always going to be something that needs to be worked on. So that is all I have for you guys today. I would appreciate if you guys have any questions, so let me know. You should have my email, juliema@shawneecc.edu. So I'll be available at any time. And if you guys have any questions about Chapter 10 or the paper, just let me know. And I will talk to you guys later. Bye!